Hello everyone, and welcome to another event hosted by the Cambridge University Social Impact and Sustainability Society, or CUSUS for short. The topic for today is climate repair, the challenge and the way forward, and we are very honored to host our esteemed presenter, Professor Sir David King, whom our Society's Environmental Director, Ms. Diana Sukailo, will introduce shortly. Sir David King has asked us to refer to him as Sir Dave in conversation, so we're not abusing any protocol with political license. My name is Navin Seeterram, the Events and Social Impact Director at CUSUS, and I'm pleased to welcome you and to address some housekeeping matters for this session. This event is being recorded and will be available to everyone via our YouTube channel soon, and as per usual, students at the Cambridge Judge Business School will be pleased to know that today's session will be uploaded to the VLE for your learning purposes. In proceeding with today's session, please bear with me as we cover some housekeeping items. If you haven't already done so, please ensure that your mics are muted for the duration of the session. Also, please be aware that a general chat box won't be used in getting questions to the panel. Questions to our guests must be sent directly to myself as I assist Diana with co-moderating today. So via the chat, look for my name, Navin Seeterram, select it and type your question to me in there. I will receive those questions and pass them on accordingly. We promise we will do our best to get to as many questions as we can, finishing up just at about 7 p.m. UK time. Now I am pleased to pass you on to the main event where our Environmental Impact Director, Ms. Diana Sukailo, will introduce Professor Sir David King. Diana, happy Monday to you.
Thank you, Navin. Hello, and thank you all for joining us in this exciting session with Professor Sir David King. Today, we cover an extremely important topic, climate repair, the challenge and the way forward. As temperatures rise globally, extreme weather events such as floods, storms, droughts, and heat waves are becoming the new normal, so much so that they are starting to be felt around the world even at this precise moment. Just a few days ago in the Ukrainian capital Kiev, from where I'm currently speaking to you, we recorded the hottest day in June in about 135 years. At the same time, there is flooding in Detroit, and California is in drought. If things continue as they are now, we risk having a world of food shortages, water stress, refugees, biodiversity loss, among many other ruinous climate-driven consequences. It is deeply concerning that climate change caused by human activity threatens our very existence. However, things do not necessarily need to happen this way if we commit actions towards reversing the current trend. Sir David King has dedicated much of his very esteemed career to this end, and he will address this today as he helps us navigate the terrain of climate repair. It is my great honor to introduce our speaker, Professor Sir David King. Sir David is Emeritus Professor of Chemistry at the University of Cambridge, founder and chair of the Cambridge University Centre for Climate Repair, an affiliate partner of Systemic Limited, and senior strategy advisor to the President of Rwanda. Sir David was the UK Government Chief Scientific Advisor and the Foreign Secretary's Special Representative on Climate Change. Sir David has traveled widely to persuade all countries to take action on climate change. Another extremely important and inspiring thing I want to mention is the recent launch of Global Climate Crisis Advisory Group last Thursday, headed by Sir David King. We will hear more about it in his presentation. All of us at CUSUS want to congratulate you on the launch. Things like this give us a lot of hope for better and faster positive change. Well, I could spend at least 20 minutes more listing Sir Dave's accolades, but for the sake of time, I will suggest you visit our website, cusus.org, to read a longer biography. So Dave, good evening to you and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. I know you have prepared a very insightful presentation for us. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you for the next half an hour or so, and then we will follow it with a Q&A session. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Diana, for that introduction. I am waiting to see my slides come up, but I'm really delighted to be talking to you, and I look forward in particular to the Q&A. So, as you've heard, I was in government from the year 2000 until mid-2017, when I left to set up the Centre for Climate Repair at Cambridge. And the reason is because I felt that it was not sufficiently well recognised globally that we are in a climate crisis. And so setting up the Centre for Climate Repair was the objective was to set out a complete strategy for how we could manage this crisis in a way that means that most societies would be able to do reasonably well going forward in time. And that's what I'm going to describe to you here. But first of all, if I could have my first slide, I just need to explain, as you've heard, I'm a scientist, I'm inclined to talk about the scientific side of it. And so I just thought I would bring us all up to the same point in understanding the development of climate science, which all began in 1820 when the French mathematician Fourier decided that he should be able to calculate the average temperature at the surface of the Earth, because he knew how much radiation was reaching us from the sun. And he found when he did his first calculation that his temperature was just not right. It was out by 30 degrees. He got it considerably colder than it actually is. And that 30 degrees was clearly beyond the inaccuracies in his calculation. And he rightly assumed that what he had left out was the heat captured by the Earth's atmosphere. And he put in what would be called a fudge factor now to get the right temperature and published his paper. And in 1860, this was followed by the Irish scientist Tyndall, who surprised everyone by discovering, including himself, that only the minority gases in the atmosphere, which can be measured in terms of hundreds of parts per million of the atmosphere, were absorbing heat radiated from the Earth's surface and keeping the planet warmer. So the greenhouse gases derive from Tyndall's very, very careful measurement of heat absorbed in the atmosphere. And what he did was simply create a sample in which all the greenhouse gases were removed, and then he found that the heat absorbed was zero. Oxygen and nitrogen do not absorb radiated heat. We then move on to 1898, when the Swedish scientist and early Nobel Prize winner Svante Arrhenius calculated what effect fossil fuel burning would have on the temperature at the surface of the Earth. So the first person who connected fossil fuel burning with rises in greenhouse gases, in particular with carbon dioxide rises in the atmosphere. And he said, if we should double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the temperature rise would be about 5 degrees centigrade. And today, we would probably say that with the biggest computers in the world, we're calculating a number which is not very different from Arrhenius's figure. Perhaps we would rather say 3 plus or minus 2 degrees centigrade. And I'm now going to take you to where we've got to in terms of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So first of all, the pre-industrial level. I'm only going to give a few numbers here. Pre-industrially, we had 275 parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And the next slide shows from 1700, that pre-industrial point onwards, that greenhouse gases have been rising to the point where we're now at 500 parts per million. So we have nearly reached Arrhenius's figure of doubling the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. By the way, when Arrhenius published that paper, many people criticized him for saying something that they said could never be achieved. Humanity will never change the greenhouse gas level by that amount. You may know that the traditional figure given for the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is actually lower, 415 parts per million today. But that figure corresponds only to carbon dioxide levels. And that's very misleading, because the biggest new contributor to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is methane. So you see that difference between the blue curve and the red and the black curves is entirely due to what is happening due to methane in the atmosphere. And so this level, 500 parts per million, I don't know of a climate scientist who would say that anything more than 450 parts per million is manageable going forward into the future by humanity. So I'm going to argue that we have already passed the point where we have put too much greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This is not what we're hearing from the COP process. People are saying that because we're at 415, there's still an amount of carbon we could burn and increase up to 450. We're beyond that figure. Why is the methane level increasing? It's important to understand this. Yes, a lot of it is from oil and gas recovery and the leakage of oil in those processes, and from coal mining. But what I can tell you is that the recent bigger increase, particularly since about 2000, 2005, has been due to farming, and in particular, rice and livestock are both responsible for significant methane emissions. However, there's a big risk, and I will raise the point about the big risk going forward in terms of massive releases of methane from a region of the planet. So let me move on. What I'm going to describe is the real risk that I think is predominant. It's only one of the risks, and I'm going to focus on that one, but please believe me, there are many other risks we're faced with. And this comes from what is happening in the Arctic Circle region. Globally, we agreed in Paris to aim for no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial level, if at all possible. But today we are at 1.25 parts per million global average, 1.25 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial level, and that is the global average. But when I go up to the Arctic Circle region, the temperature rise there is such that the average is sitting at about 3.5 degrees centigrade for the whole of the Arctic Circle region, which is a very large region of the planet. And so here are some measurements by the Cambridge scientist Peter Wadhams that have been averaged for the thickness of the ice sitting over the Arctic Sea. And this is the yearly minimum Arctic ice volume sitting over the Arctic Sea. And what is, of course, very significant about this is that the volume of ice has been diminishing rather rapidly from when Peter began the measurements in 1980, and it appears that the rate of removal of ice or loss of ice from the Arctic Sea, covering the Arctic Sea, has been increasing over that period of time with time. So what is happening is that as a result of the global warming that is happening, but also as a result of, during the polar summer, the exposure of regions of the Arctic Sea to sunlight. Arctic ice reflects sunlight very efficiently back into space, whereas the blue sea absorbs sunlight. And so as little chunks of the Arctic Sea become scattered, but nevertheless available for sunlight absorption, we see that the whole of the Arctic Circle region is warming up. Today, about 50% of the Arctic Sea is exposed to sunlight during the Arctic summer. We're in the middle of the polar summer now, and of course that means that there is sunlight right round the clock, 24-hour-a-day sunlight, and this is the major reason why that part of the world is heating up so rapidly. And as the Arctic Circle region is warmed up from the North Pole outwards, the cold air is shoved away by this warmer air sitting over the North Pole region where the Arctic Sea is exposed during the polar summer. Let me take you to the next slide, which simply shows the temperature rise in that Arctic Circle region in green, And you'll see the temperature rise up to 2020 was just hitting 3 degrees centigrade. We're now at 3.5 degrees centigrade this year. And in some regions of the Arctic Circle, the temperature rises are alarmingly bigger. Last year, there were reports in northern Russia of temperatures of 30 degrees centigrade plus. And this year, we've got reports from northern Finland of temperatures of 31 to 35 degrees centigrade being observed. These enormously high temperatures are, I believe, due to the absorption of heat by the Arctic Sea that is exposed. So there's the big risk. I've got here for comparison the temperature rises in the mid-north hemisphere and the mid-south hemisphere, just to indicate how the Arctic Circle region is out of kilter with what is happening on the rest of the planet. And so when we say 1.5 degrees centigrade and no more above the pre-industrial level, actually the Arctic Circle region is well above that figure. And now what I want to say to you is, what happens in the Arctic Circle region is going to have an enormous impact on the whole world. So let me take you to the next slide. Here I'm simply showing to you the two major global consequences of Arctic warming. When ice on the sea melts, that blue sea shown there, when ice on the Arctic Sea melts, the melting of the ice just produces water going into the sea, and there is no net sea level rise. But when the ice on land melts, such as on Greenland, then all of that ice goes into the ocean. And we've seen for some time now, the Greenland is beginning to lose significant amounts of ice every Arctic summer, and that rate of loss is also going up year on year. And if all of the Greenland ice were to melt and go into the ocean, the global sea level will have risen by 7.5 meters, 23, 24 feet. And so all of this ice has been accumulating over thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And so what we see is that this percolation of seawater onto the land as ice, which happens, of course, as snow falls, that has been continuing without significant loss of ice during the Arctic summer for thousands of years and accumulating a lot of ice on there. So there's the first big threat. The second big threat is methane. The Arctic Circle land regions, the land mass in northern Canada, the land mass in the very northern tips of Siberia, of Russia, contain a lot of methane. The methane is captured as a molecule, methane hydrate. So methane forms a molecule with water. It's a very unstable molecule, and it actually it dissociates. The methane and the water dissociates at temperatures below the melting point of ice. And there's the big risk. So what we see here is just bubbles of methane emerging from the permafrost. There's some regions where if you throw a match onto the permafrost, the ice, you will see a nice blue glow, a blue glow from the methane catching fire. So let me take you to the next slide and just quickly deal with the big risk that we're faced with in terms of methane emissions. In 2014, some people living in a very small village on the permafrost in Yamal, the northernmost region of Russia, reported that they heard very loud explosions. And a group of academicians, Russian Academy of Sciences members, were sent up to investigate. And what they found were these large craters. And the crater is the result of methane being released from methane hydrate, forming a bubble under the ice, and then exploding when the pressure on the bubble exceeds the gravity due to the ice and permafrost above it. So this looks a bit brown. There is some earth in the permafrost, but mostly it's ice and methane. And so when it explodes, you get a little rim of the Earth around it, and the rest of it just leaves a nice hollow crater. Very beautiful round craters being formed in this process. Roughly 1,000 of these have happened so far, measuring about 50 meters. You can see 3 members of the Russian Academy team on the other side of the crater, and the shadow of the photographer is shown on the same side as them. It's about 50 meters in diameter, about 60, 70 meters deep on average, these explosions leaving craters of that size. Now, there's a big worry. No scientist predicted explosive releases of this kind, and they are occurring now continuously in that region during these remarkably hot summer months. It's only a 3-month period, but this is when the big risk happens. So far, the release has not made a very much difference to methane contents in the atmosphere, but nevertheless, there's enough methane down there to push, in the permafrost, to push temperatures up to by 8 or 9 degrees centigrade. So this is a second very big risk for the whole world, because of course methane permeates the whole atmosphere and all countries will be impacted by that. Now, I'm telling you all of the difficult things, and then I promise I will explain how we might manage to keep this all under control. So let me take you to the next slide. Here's an estimate on the right-hand side, the most recent estimate of flooding in the region of the world due to sea level rise that will be most impacted, and this is just in 30 years' time. 30 years from now, we're anticipating, the left-hand side was a projection made 10 years ago. This is with modern knowledge on the right-hand side. We see that the expectation is that Vietnam will be about plus 90% flooded at least once a year with seawater. The reason is that Vietnam is close to sea level. The Mekong Delta, which you see better on the figure on the left-hand side, this vast Mekong Delta has been pushing silt out into the ocean, and that is the country of Vietnam. It's all based on this Mekong Delta that was originally all silted down, coming from Cambodia and above. Mekong Delta is where the world's biggest rice paddy fields are. It's third biggest producer of rice in the world, and sitting across from Vietnam is Indonesia, which is also close to sea level. It's an archipelago, a lot of islands, and this year the capital of Indonesia, Jakarta, was underwater in January and February this year, and it is predicted that well before 2050, Jakarta and Ho Chi Minh City as well will be incapable of managing its large population. So Jakarta, the city centre, is a large, bustling, modern city. Anyone who's been there will attest to that. It's really largely been constructed out of the tiger economy of Indonesia, and so it is an investment that's been made over the last 20 years. And that investment will not yield a living place for its population to 2050. The government of Indonesia is now moving the capital to higher ground. They know that they will have to abandon Jakarta at this continued rate of sea level rise. Now, of course, every nation in the world has coastlines, or most nations in the world have coastlines, and big cities sitting on coastlines. The cities of Calcutta and Mumbai in this region of the world will probably be unlivable also by mid-century unless something is done about this major challenge. And what I'm saying is this challenge arises from what's happening in the Arctic Circle region. Let me take you to the next slide, because I do want to say a few positive things now. So COP26, I am still feeling somewhat positive about the outcomes of COP26, having been heavily involved in the negotiations, particularly up to COP21 in Paris, the last big meeting. This is the next big meeting. I'm feeling optimistic because China and the United States are now both committed to real action on climate change. Real action meaning getting down to net zero emissions by mid-century or just after mid-century. I believe that leadership from China and the United States working together has been missing since 1992, and we now have that opportunity. In fact, we have missed the leadership role of the United States throughout these negotiations. And now I have to say that I feel Biden's appointment of John Kerry, who was their chief negotiator for the Paris Agreement, is a very good move. And Xi Jinping, the president of China, announced that he was taking Minister Xie Zhenhua out of retirement in China the day that Kerry's appointment was announced by Biden, which I thought was a tremendous signal to the American president that China wants to work alongside America in the COP26 process. The UK, the first country to commit to net zero by 2050 in 2017, and we committed first in the whole world to 80% reduction by 2050, originally in 2008. So that was upgraded by Theresa May in 2017 to a net zero target. And we have a Climate Change Committee of Parliament that sits there to tell the government of the day how to manage the process. And this is how the Prime Minister at the G7 meeting recently was able to announce a 78% cut in emissions by 2035. That's not net, that is in emissions. And this is because the Climate Change Committee of Parliament has set out for the governments of the future what needs to be done to achieve that zero target by 2050, but en route 78% by 2035. So we're setting the targets well into the future. Now, this means that since we're in the presidency, I was rather hoping that we'd work with China and the United States in bringing the target together to manage this crisis in a proper way. Let me take you to the next slide. Setting up the Centre for Climate Repair at Cambridge, the targets we set are the global targets. Of course, Cambridge University and our centre is not going to deliver this on its own. These targets are set as a target for us to work with other universities around the world, which we are doing, for us to work with political leaders around the world, for us to work with financial investors around the world on the processes required. So here's what we're setting in train: deep and rapid emissions reduction. Without this, frankly, we are cooked. If we were to stop all emissions tomorrow, we already have put too much greenhouse gases up in the atmosphere, and the melting of the Greenland ice sheet will continue. I haven't mentioned Antarctica. What's happening there will continue. I haven't mentioned Kilimanjaro. The loss of ice from up there will also continue, all with disastrous consequences. So what we also need is, number two, to create new greenhouse gas sinks. And I'm talking about sinks that can scale up beyond 1 billion tons of greenhouse gases per annum. We would like to achieve something like 30 to 40 billion tons of greenhouse gases removed every year into the future. And even at that level, if we were to achieve net zero globally by 2040, we would still take to the end of the century to get ourselves to a comfortable place, which is less than 350 parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere from the current 500 plus that we're at. Now, of course, we need to buy time because the melting of the ice in the Arctic Circle region has rather taken us all by surprise. And so the next target is one that raises many eyebrows. We need to see if we can refreeze the poles. President Grimson, who was the president of Iceland until very recently, he was president of Iceland for 20 years, in a discussion I had with him, has said, this is necessary because we need to buy time while the first two targets are achieved. Absolutely the right expression. It is necessary to refreeze the Arctic Circle region, and we need to set about that very quickly. The fourth and obvious target is we need to promote agile political and investment responses. And the question is going to be, can we do that? Or are we going to be caught up in bureaucratic discussions and angling for my benefits for my country against others and so on? The usual arguments that happen in any sort of negotiations. So let me take you forward. Next slide. We face a climate crisis, and I have formed a climate crisis advisory group. This is a group of 15 globally leading scientists, energy experts, energy transition experts, experts in social sciences, but particularly they're all experts and leading experts from 10 different countries around the world. And we are meeting once a month, and the meeting takes place on every Thursday, last Thursday of the month. And on this day, we meet on British summertime at 12 noon through till 1:30, 1.5 hour meeting. It's open, it's a Zoom call open to the public, and we take questions from the media. At our first meeting, we had questions globally from leading members of the media, and many of them wrote to us saying, please continue. The object of this is to reach out to the political sphere, to reach out to the public domain and explain that what we agreed in Paris, that 1.5 degrees centigrade target, is not even enough, and we have to do considerably more. Let me take you to the next slide. The political actions in the past have been based on national actions, and these have been very successful, particularly in Europe. Regulation, beginning in Germany. Every country benefited from what Germany began in 1989, which was to introduce feed-in tariffs across the whole of Germany. If you put photovoltaics on your rooftop, or if you built a wind turbine, create electricity, put the electricity on the grid, you were paid a very handsome figure for every kilowatt hour you put on the grid, which meant that you covered your capital costs in a very short period of time. This was a subsidy to create a new marketplace in renewable energy systems, and it was very successful. We came in 1997 in Britain, and in the rest of Europe came in by 2003. And what we in Europe created was a market big enough to bring energy prices down by a very substantial margin. The biggest success in Britain has been offshore wind, where offshore wind, surprisingly to many, including myself, is now cheaper to install per kilowatt hour produced in reality than if we had built a new coal-fired or gas-fired power station on land. And the reason is offshore wind has very long wind turbine blades, 110 meters long. You couldn't get them around the roads of any country. You can get them by ship out to those turbines at sea. And these wind turbines are easily the most energy productive in the world. So a lot of things have been happening nationally, then international collaboration, cooperation. I've just mentioned what's happened across the European Union, but the European Union recently created a fund of €1 trillion to be spent over the coming 10 years to create green finance. Mission Innovation is a project I'll talk about in just a moment. And these are all international cooperations where the willing nations get together. Globally, the United Nations Framework Convention is, of course, the major means of operating the global process, but it took them from 1992 to 2015 to reach that Paris Agreement, and we're still nowhere near delivering on that agreement. And the meeting this year in Glasgow was originally intended to see that all countries would focus on delivering that 1.5 degrees centigrade target. Mission Innovation 2. Mission Innovation 1 was set up on the first day of the Paris COP meeting. I'm very pleased to tell you, and rather proud of this, that it was an idea that I had 4 years in advance of that. Why not invite countries willing to join a program to spend $30 billion a year of public money on clean energy technologies to reach the energy transition required to move away from fossil fuels? And that agreement was achieved by simply asking heads of governments to stand under a sign saying Mission Innovation on the first day of the COP meeting, but outside the official negotiations. 22 countries representing 75% of global GDP had their heads of government standing under that banner. And by 2025, it has now been agreed we will be spending $40 to $45 billion a year. And Biden's arrival has allowed us to increase this figure very significantly. So this is a mechanism for willing nations to get together and create alliances that can foster change far more quickly, I believe, than the rest of the community can catch up. Next slide, please. Oh, this is that banner I've just talked about, Mission Innovation, and there are the heads of governments, 22. We've now got 25 heads of government signed up. One person there is not a head of government, that's Bill Gates, and Bill Gates set up something called the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, which has already spent about $2 billion of investment into the solutions emerging from the Mission Innovation Program. Next slide. This is my favorite technology to emerge. This is a British company, Varilift Airship. This is a vast airship surrounded by an aluminium frame. Inside that frame, there are 12 identical compartments. This is the post-ocean disasters. Every ocean ship now has 12 panels in it. And inside each of those areas, there's identical equipment. There's a helium cylinder, a helium-containing bag, and a compressor. You want to raise this airship, you release helium, of course, into these bags in these 12 chambers. You want to bring it down slowly. You pump the helium back into the cylinder it came out of. You don't lose helium. And that's how it's raised to 30,000 feet. But underneath there, this one is designed for freight carriage, is a carrier region that will take about 150 tons of freight. This is a very efficient means of carrying freight around the world. But what you don't see here is because of the large size of the airship, it has another big advantage. The top of this airship is covered with photovoltaics. When it's at 30,000 feet, no cloud cover, the photovoltaics produce enough electricity to drive those electric engines on the side there, produced by Siemens, so that the airship fully loaded can travel at about 340 kilometers per hour, unloaded about 450 kilometers per hour. So it's not sluggish. And it means that I believe that once this is in the marketplace, it's going to be one of these breakthrough technologies that will simply transform air travel in general. Next slide. Now I come to greenhouse gas removal. And what we've done is to go through all of the possible technologies that could be used and then focus down on those that we think are capable of taking more than 1 billion tons of greenhouse gases a year. And the third arrow bullet point down, marine-based technologies is what we're focused on. The oceans cover a little over 70% of the world's surface, and there's very, very little focus on how we could use the oceans to remove greenhouse gases. But at the same time, our program is we can restock the oceans with the level of fish and mammals, whales, and so on, to the level it was at 200 or 300 years ago. So this is a major possible way to do this. I'm going to move on quickly now to the next slide and simply say, this is my favorite, the ocean surf Scion fertilization. We create a green layer of phytoplankton by imitating a natural process. When the wind blows over the Sahara Desert and picks up a dust storm and takes it over the Atlantic, and when the storm dies down, the dust peppers the surface of the ocean with iron-containing iron-containing particles from the desert sand. Iron is the missing nutrient. Within a month, that area is green with phytoplankton. Phytoplankton is the foodstuff for fish larvae, and within 3 months, that area will, typically covering 50,000 square kilometers, will have about 2 billion fish to 5 billion fish. So fish stocks rise rapidly in the ocean every time this happens. And what we're planning to do is to see if we can reproduce this without any negative consequences, but instead restock the ocean with fish. And then that whole process takes up a very significant amount of green material, of carbon dioxide into the green material. So what I'm actually saying is, I believe with this one technique, we should be capable of removing 10 to maybe even 30 billion tons of greenhouse gases a year. And this is a big focus of our work. Next slide. If I look at lower atmosphere solar radiation management, I'm going to focus here on the first of these, marine cloud brightening, which is what we are focused on. So what we're doing is working to see if we can create white clouds. We know how to do this. We create very fine salt spray, which is taken up into the atmosphere, the upper part of the atmosphere by wind, and creates white clouds. And we can create these white clouds in a way that they blow over the Arctic Sea during the 3 months of the polar summer, and we reflect sunlight away. That's the object of the game. Next slide. We are working with, this is David Attenborough's comment when I told him about this. He said, were it possible, would be a huge defense against the global catastrophes, and I think he's right. And this is what we're focused on in particular. Next slide shows the intervention that we're working with the University of Edinburgh on. We're creating these very fine droplets of water which are carried up by wind up into the upper atmosphere. These are drawings of the ships designed by a marine engineer based in Edinburgh, but we're working very closely in our Department of Engineering here. And both our director of the Centre for Climate Repair and our deputy director are members of the Department of Engineering. And that takes me to the last slide, which is the full stop. I think we have to do all of these things. I think we have a short period of time to get all of these things in place. How short? I'd say 5 years. And then we have to really operate them at scale in order to manage a safe Earth for humankind going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry. All right, thank you very much for that, Sir Dave. I'm going to go jump straight to the Q&A. We do have 50 minutes till the end of the hour. However, if people are willing to indulge us to go on a bit after time, we could do that a little bit. We'll try to do our very best for that. Diana's having some technical difficulties there. So I know I did say that she will handle the moderation, but I will handle the moderation from here on. So we have a bunch of questions coming in. The first question did come in from Paula. And she asks, Sir Dave, thanks for the insights. Could you please tell me what do you think about the impact due to the economic system on the climate and if you think economic growth is necessary or at odds with reducing carbon emissions.
Well, I fully understand the nature of the question, because the economic system that we have has proved really amazingly productive. If we look around the world at the number of people emerging into the global middle class, global middle class was just over 1 billion in the year 2000, and we are now approaching 3 billion. And this is all in the former developing part of the world, all of those rapidly emerging economies. So we can't naysay all of the good that has emerged from that. But nevertheless, the question is absolutely right. Is it fit for purpose in the 21st century when it leads to what I would say is rampant consumption? And rampant consumption, I mean by that phrase that it's consumption that goes way beyond human well-being. It's unnecessary consumption of the human resources and of the world's resources. But more than that, the economic system that we've used has completely ignored the value of ecosystems to humanity. And so when I say the value of ecosystems, I mean all ecosystems, because we're talking now about changing greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere. We emerged, evolutionarily speaking, many years ago, perhaps 1 million years ago plus, we emerged in such a way that we moved into a planet where we were perfectly fitted, just the right amount of oxygen in the air, right amount of carbon dioxide to create the green matter that we like to eat, and so on. Everything was perfect, not by design, but by evolution. And now we are responsible for changing that ecosystem management process because we never managed it. And I do think that this is a Western problem. I think, for example, that if you go back into Buddhism or Taoism or even Confucianism, there is a respect for nature, which I don't see coming through in the system that we have managed, perhaps beginning way back even in Greece. We began moving away from understanding the importance of ecosystems to ourselves. I don't believe an economic system can operate into the future unless we operate fully understanding that. The Chinese government, interestingly, has introduced a new concept into their program of work, and they are committed to this. It's eco-civilization. And I gave a speech in China saying this had to come from China because it comes from your culture. It really is from Buddhism and Taoism. And what I believe eco-civilization they define as managing the well-being of ecosystems alongside the well-being of humanity, because the one depends on the other. So yes, I accept this, but we have to operate within this economic system now. And for me, the big focus is on the financial side of our system. Investors need to understand. They need to make investments that are fit for the future. Fit for the future means managing a safe future for humanity. If you invest in infrastructure which is fossil fuel based today, you are making a very poor investment. You won't get a return on it because we're going to have to abandon all of that.
So it seems that as you allude to, like China, they sort of they went back into their culture to sort of marry something to help with the current problem, right?
Exactly right.
So
yeah.
Where do you see the ability to sort of reconstitute the Western mindset? If you reference the problem as being Western, I know you're talking about going to investors, and you referenced some of the climate change repair technologies you mentioned. Where do you see that going?
So I think, frankly, Navin, this is a critically important question, because if we set out all of the technological things that we need to do, etc., that's not going to happen unless we get people's hearts and minds behind this. And so I do think that there needs to be a global rethink around how we manage our future. We being all of humanity working together, but with managing our ecosystems at the same time. Because if we can get that message through, and by the way, the Partha Dasgupta report that he put into government on the biosystems of the world recognizes this absolutely, that we haven't put a value on the world's biosystems, which of course is a critical part of our ecosystems. I mentioned what we were doing in the deep oceans.
Yes.
That is a part of this whole process.
Right. And just to all our viewers, Sapata, his review is also available on our website on www.qsys.org. So if you want to get some background on what Sir Dave is referencing. We have another question from Xavier Parkhouse Parker. He asks, do you believe the development of nascent clean technologies will create a significant enough impact to repair the climate?
No, I think it's a necessary part of the process. So we should not be investing in any infrastructure today, any new infrastructure today, anywhere in the world, and I'll come to the developing part of the world in a moment, if it's not fit for purpose, meaning it cannot be carbon dioxide emitting. So all of our infrastructure investment going forward has that little criterion, actually major criterion attached to it. And so when I say, yes, the developing world is in some difficulty because the finance required needs to be adjusted and created, we need to see that we do get a transfer of funds from the wealthier countries to the poorer countries to enable this transition to take place globally. But I don't think, I was involved in a discussion with a very important person from Africa today, and I'm originally from that part of the world. And he was saying, so what do we do about those parts of Africa where a major part of the economy depends on oil, gas, and coal, or oil, or gas, or coal? And I said, we have to help them make that transition. And the we in that sentence is we from the wealthier parts of the world.
All right. I know there are a lot of viewers in here would very much welcome that sentiment. We have Nicholas Novel has asked, what are your thoughts on geoengineering to artificially cool down the earth while we build truly sustainable technologies across industries, like aerosol type solutions?
So the question here is related to the idea put forward many years ago by a Nobel Prize winning chemist, that what we should do is put sulfates into the stratosphere, and sulfates in the stratosphere would reflect sunlight away from the earth, and we could cool the earth down artificially in this way. I believe experiments should be conducted into that. I'm a bit disappointed that the proposed experiment in Scandinavia was cancelled by the people of Sweden. I understand why they didn't want the experiments conducted on their land, but nevertheless, I think experiments need to be conducted in case we have to resort to that sort of use. But I think there should be a moratorium placed on doing that at scale, for the very simple reason. We have been working since the Montreal Protocol back in the 1980s on removing CFCs from emissions into the atmosphere because they were removing ozone from the stratosphere. If we now start putting chalk up into the stratosphere, aren't we risking once again more ozone holes? But that's just one problem. Another problem is some of the models showing installation of stuff into the stratosphere causing a loss of the monsoons in India and in Africa. What would that do to the people of that part of the world? Right, so I think there are potentially very dangerous consequences. And what we're trying to work with are nature-based or nature-mimicking processes, so that this is seen to be part of the natural world and is in fact part of the natural world.
Okay.
I don't like to use the word geoengineering for anything except putting sulfates or chalk up into the stratosphere.
Okay, very good. Um, we have another question coming in. This is related to oil and gas. We have a Dr. Graham King has asked, do you agree with the assertion by some oil and gas companies like Shell and BP that natural gas is an important transition fuel and has a growing role in the next 20 to 30 years?
Okay, that's the most difficult question that I've been asked so far. And the reason I say it's difficult is because I'm all for a transition that is manageable. I do not want to say to people, tomorrow you've got to stop using fossil fuels, because I know that this would lead to an enormous amount of suffering. And even if I said that in 10 years' time, by 2030, I think there would be an enormous amount of suffering. I was invited out to South Africa to talk to the trade union movement there. And this is my country of origin, and they rather like me. So they invited me to explain to their coal miners, what did I mean by giving up on burning coal? How could they possibly live? And my argument is that the government of South Africa needs to be building photovoltaic farms in the Kalahari Desert in South Africa, and they need to be retraining coal mines, come up out of the coal mines, have a nice clean job in the Kalahari Desert, which is a very beautiful part of the country, but retraining by the government in that program. And this is really the right way to manage it.
Right. Okay. All right. Sorry, there's a lot of questions coming in, so I'm just trying to go through. Right. So here's a question about what can we as individuals, this comes from a member of CUSIS, what can we as individuals do to support climate repair when governments still don't seem to be treating this as a priority, and especially in developing world? I know you did allude to it. And is there still hope, or should we be moving to higher ground now? This is someone who's speaking, lives in who's someone who, I guess, in a sea level sort of state.
Yeah. Don't move to higher ground yet, please. I think that's not my message. My message is we need urgently to refreeze the Arctic to prevent this from happening. And London is severely at risk from flooding with a reasonable amount of sea level rise. So, and the island states of the world will not have a place to live, many of them, as sea levels rise. So, I think. What can we do? The global political system is largely based on a democratic process, and it is democracy that determines who is in government. So what you can do is influence other people. We are all influenced by the behavior of people around us, and we can influence people. And I think part of that influence is not being rude to people, but if you know somebody who has just bought a large new SUV driven on diesel, you could have a few words with that person, if that's a good friend of yours, and more or less say, what the hell are you doing? There is no future for the planet if we all start behaving like that. And so wherever possible, people should be doing whatever is necessary within their ability range, within their group, whatever. We need to be setting examples to each other. So I don't think anyone can simply sit back and say, I'll leave it to the political system to deal with. We are responsible very heavily for what our political system is delivering for us. And in those parts of the world where you don't feel that you're responsible, I think you have to find out how you can even create in your own little circle of friends, wherever you are in your working place, the right atmosphere to achieve this cultural change. And that's what we're speaking about. But I think that there's another very important side to this. We have created a world in which the wealthy get wealthier and the poor are left behind. And I do think we need to be working on that socio-political side of things as well. It all goes hand in hand. Where do most of the skeptics on climate change come from? I'm afraid we've got, what the estimate is, 68% of our news media in Britain controlled by exactly 4 billionaires. And if they see a vested interest in their investments, which might be in the oil and gas industries, then they will fight against climate change. By the way, I didn't quite answer your question about the oil and gas industries, but
yeah, it's a tough one.
it is a tough one. But what I do want to say is this, that I have been approached by several of the oil and gas companies saying to me, could we consult from you on how we make the transition? Now, if you came to me as Vice President Sustainability from one of these oil companies, and I have said this to one of them, I will say, I want to see a letter signed on letterheaded paper from your CEO saying my company is committed to zero emissions in all of our operations, but also in our sales. So in other words, if you announce you're committed to being a clean energy company in the future, then I'm going to work with you, but otherwise not. That letter never materialized. And I frankly can't afford to lose my reputation by being used as greenwash by a company like that.
Yeah. I wonder if there's some interface with this sort of stakeholder capitalism models with Charles, I think with Mr. Schwab from the World Economic Forum. They're kind of promoting.
Sorry,
right?
with who?
It's the leader of the World Economic Forum.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's done a book on stakeholder capitalism, right?
Right.
And there's also Owen in the end. They seem to have a good framework of how you could get, if you could sort of get a segue into solving certain environmental problems that could affect stakeholders, and there's a value that could sort of redound, that maybe there's opportunities there for research, maybe.
I applaud that, just as I applaud all of the cooperatives.
Yeah.
Like Arup is a cooperative company. It's one of our most successful engineering companies, but every employee is an owner of the company. And that is going some way towards being stakeholder capitalism.
Yeah. All right, there's another question here from Maduka. I may have to close up the question just now because we're past the hour. I do apologize.
Don't apologize to me.
Okay. All right. So Maduka's question is, how do we ensure that the solutions and the process of creating these solutions do not inadvertently create problems of their own? For instance, heavy metals from battery manufacturing. Can you expand on how the benefit may outweigh the cost?
Okay. I mean, this again is really an excellent question. I'm just going to go back to what we're doing in the Centre for Climate Repair, Cambridge. We're going to do 4 years of deep and expensive experiments on any intervention we're going to make to check that there is no possible negative impact, right? So we want to be absolutely watertight on anything we're going to then roll out at scale, such as the iron fertilization of the ocean surface. So I think we have to be very, very cautious about each of these interventions. Now, the specific question was such as heavy metals in batteries. Now, of course, lithium is not a heavy metal. And this is important. Lead was the heavy metal in batteries.
Right.
Moving forward, there is a problem because you may know that a lot of the lithium is coming from mines in Chile, and it's being mined on the ground, and it's very, very destructive to the local environment. That is a real problem. But if you ask me whether electric motors for land-based vehicles is a good idea, absolutely. I think whatever negative outcome there is, there's so much new research going on into new battery technologies that I believe there will be new batteries emerging very soon that will be very sustainable, and where the elements such as lithium are all recoverable. So you design the batteries so that when the battery has finished its given lifetime, it's just recycled back into condition. So I think this is a very good and important question, because focusing on recycling is taking us to the circular economy. And the circular economy is what the natural process is. The forests of the world, when a tree dies, that dead tree contributes to the growth of new trees in the way that it decays. It contributes to the growth of biological matter of all kinds. And that's the kind of imitation that we must have. Going forward in time, everything ought to be operated under the circular economy.
Yes.
Very demanding.
Yes, yes. And then Cambridge are doing a lot of good work with that, and this is
Yes.
especially on the circular economy and advocating for such. And I have another question here. I'm going to have to do this one, and there's one more after, and then I'm going to have to close it off, unfortunately. Apologies to everyone. From Adrian Duen. Do investments in the recycling industry to energy companies come as welcome to solving a waste to energy production problem for the future?
Sorry, does recycling?
Do investments in recycling, right, for energy companies come as a welcome way to solve the problem, the solution of looking at waste to energy?
Yeah, and I think that was really what I was saying just then.
Right, yeah, because that's why I just segued to that. I saw that question and I thought it would connect, yeah.
We need to recycle.
Yeah.
We need to move towards the circular economy. And by the way, again, we don't have much time to do this.
Yeah.
This rapidly emerging global middle class, which I very strongly welcome. I'm expecting by mid-century, it'll be possibly 6 billion, right? Twice where we are now.
Yeah.
Now, we want to see that happening. How do we manage that on a finite single planet? There is no planet B. Forget about going to live on Mars. We're going to this, our planet, for all of those people.
Yeah. All right, so the last question will come from Yogesh Patak. He asks, in India, we implemented a small project to arrest rainwater in pits on village levels, and that resulted in significant rise in groundwater levels. Can such projects be replicated elsewhere?
Oh, absolutely. Good practice has to be replicated elsewhere. I mean, I think this is very refreshing because I certainly know of areas of India that have become arid because of salt rising up. Mm-hmm. And if we can create fresh water in the top level of the earth, then you keep that earth available for being productive. Yeah, best practice. That's another little comment that one could make in terms of the behavior of all of us. We have to be involved in spreading best practice.
All right, excellent. That's a nice way to sort of end off the Q&A period. I just want to wrap up and say, unfortunately, we've actually run over time, so we've more than just we have to cut off in about now. So I really want to thank, on behalf of everyone here from QSIS, Sir Professor David King for being so gracious in making time from your very busy schedule to present to us today. I hope everyone has enjoyed the session as much as we have, as much as I have today. And thank you as always to everyone on our events team at Cambridge, also especially Christina from Social Innovation, who helped us to produce this event. Please be sure to check out the webpage for future events. Again, it is at QSIS.org. That's CUSISS.org. Thank you for joining us from all over the world in many different time zones today. Please do take care and stay safe. Thank you very much, Sir Dave, again. To you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye-bye, everyone. It's a real pleasure.